So this is going to be the panel discussion on digital public goods from India to the world. So now may I invite Srikant Chunduri, founder and CEO of Framewirk, on the stage to introduce the session and the speakers. Over to you, Srikant.
Thank you, Ram. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's panel discussion titled Digital Public Goods from India to the World. Digital public goods, or DPGs, as they're often abbreviated as, are emerging as a new way of developing population-scale products and platforms in order to create self-sustaining societal impact at scale. But what are DPGs, and why are they important, and why are they important today? Where are we as a nation in the global DPG journey, and why do we believe that India and Bharat are poised to lead in the global DPG race? Most pertinently, let's answer the question, how can you participate in this mission? Just over a month ago, the Ministry of External Affairs has published a note that India will assume the presidency of the G20 for 1 year, starting December 1st, 2022. Let me read out a paragraph most relevant to today's session. Quote, whilst our G20 priorities are in the process of being firmed up, ongoing conversations inter alia revolve around inclusive, equitable, and sustainable growth, lifestyle for environment, women's empowerment, digital public infrastructure, and tech-enabled development in areas ranging from health, agriculture, education, commerce, skill mapping, culture and tourism, climate financing, circular economy, global food security, energy security, green hydrogen, disaster risk reduction, fight against economic crime, and multilateral reforms. Two of the G20 priorities that India will lead, digital public infrastructure and tech-enabled development, are of direct relevance to today's session. Over the next 50 minutes, we will talk about a story. The nature of this story's arc is from India to the world. We all know the yoga story. As our Prime Minister has said, there's one of the biggest exports from India to the world. We have the technology talent story, where India is now poised to become the digital talent factory of the world. But now we are talking about public goods, but in the digital realm. In the digital space, lands and seas do not define the boundary of influence that India can have on the rest of the world. But this is not a story of how India serendipitously rode the Y2K wave 22 years back to establish itself as the tech hub of the world. Nor is it a story of how, as some say, that the brain drain of the 80s and the 90s has turned into what is now being called as a brain gain. Because each of these stories paint the canvas in a context that, while convenient for now, might hide a far more fundamental reality that is taking shape in India today. We are beginning to embrace the fact that India's ability to identify and define problems and our ability to solve those problems are no longer just for India's own betterment, but can solve problems for the majority of the rest of the world. After all, we are the most populous and the most diverse country out on the map, and Bharat is heavier than India on both dimensions. In today's session, titled Digital Public Goods from India to the World, it is my honor to invite on stage our three speakers. First, I would like to invite Alok Gupta, Chief Solutions and Products Officer at EkStep Foundation. I would like to invite Jojo Mehra, Vice President, Head of Products, eGovernments Foundation. And I would also like to invite Raghu Dharmaraju, President of Products at Artpark, IISc. Welcome Alok, welcome Jojo, and welcome Raghu. So we have a new theme, but before, let me ask you a question. How many of you in the audience know what a DPG is? Right, so we have plenty of gap to cover. That's good, we have a few, but it is a theme that some of us have been working on for quite many years, and we have three practitioners who have built DPGs. So we have a lot of questions. What are DPGs exactly, and why are they relevant? So what I would like to do is this. I would like each of you to share your opening perspectives on how you see DPGs, right? Why do you even have DPGs? Why bother even building DPGs? So I would like each of you to take about 3 to 5 minutes to walk through your perspectives on digital public goods. So Alok, would you like to go first and walk through your perspective of DPGs? Yeah.
So, thanks, Srikant. So, for me to give a perspective on DPG, I would like us to walk through the journey of EkStep in context to Diksha so far. DPG is a evolving, space, and I would like use forum to, connect and see where do we take it from here. So, as I was saying, the story of Diksha. If you look at today, in fact, this is a recent, tweet from Honorable Finance Minister, where India is offering Diksha to the rest of the world in the public domain to use. So how do we as a nation reached here? Let me just walk you through some of the challenges and the pains, we as a EkStep organization has gone through to reach here. If you look at education, Diksha is a platform for school education. If you look at education space in India, it is a complex space. The scale is enormous. If you look at number of students in Indian context, it is more than the whole Europe as a continent. If you look at the diversity of languages, if you look at the diversity of number of boards, if you look at the diversity of the technological comfort of using in their own context, it's extremely diverse. So we're talking about a very diverse, a high-scale, complex problem. And when we started this journey as an organization with the relevant stakeholders, including center and state government, the first approach usual was, let's take technology and solve the problem. What are the solutions required, right? And we looked at the problem in many ways, many solutions, but it doesn't seem to solve the problem. And as we deep dive into that, they realized this is a complex problem to solve across the nation, which is the integration of Bharat and India, and then we talked about Bharat briefly. It is not one or the other. And the approach, technology will solve this problem, approach, a solution will solve this problem, or a mix of 2 or 3 solutions will solve this problem, was not taking us too far. And as part of that journey, a shift happened somewhere, I would say 3 years down the line. So somewhere 2018, we started working on what is today Diksha. And just to paint the picture, when I say Diksha, what does it mean? Just to give you some high-level numbers, we are talking about an infrastructure set which, as of today, is reaching to 180 million students, cutting across the India and Bharat boundaries, if they exist in real world. They are reaching 50 billion learning minutes. It is enabling learning in 33 different languages. You are literally touching every hook and corner, from a city to the last point in the rural India. And how do we reach here? What's the journey which took us? The first pivot, which if I have to say, which really changed the approach, was we started looking at this problem rather than a problem to be solved through technology or solutions, to a problem to be solved as an infrastructure problem. That was the moment, I think, the complete shift happened. And since it is digital, we are talking about digital infrastructure. And we're talking about digital public infrastructure because we're talking about solving problems at a population scale, which is very diverse, very complex. What does that mean? From a public infrastructure perspective, if you look at, and if each of us connect to infrastructure on a daily basis in daily life, and if I take a very simple one example, look at construction industry, and look at a very simple piece of a brick. A brick as a component can be used in many ways to build all kind of different buildings, in context to all kind of different solutions to be enabled through those buildings, right? It really enables a set of infrastructure capabilities which can be leveraged by many and everyone, to solve a problem in their context, to solve and build solutions which are of different kinds. that was an inspiration which we took and really look at Diksha from an infrastructure perspective. What really meant was look at all the diverse solutions required and break them down into what we refer as micro capabilities. How do you enable a set of micro capabilities which are distinct, which are agnostic to a context, to a particular solution, and yet can be combined in many ways to build multiple solutions? And it gives capability to different players, different stakeholders, to enable solutions in their context, to their particular need. Because that's what a brick does in a public infrastructure when we look at, from that perspective. So it was not easy. It was a pain we went through, but that was an aha moment for us, and it took us many iterations to reach a level of, of componentizing the whole, Diksha, where many solutions, but different stakeholders in their context can be enabled. Rather than solving the problem by bringing a solution, how do you bring capability and how do you bring agency to different stakeholders? And if you look at education, it has all type of players, whether it's government, whether it's private sector, whether it is social sector or NGOs, right? So how do you empower them to do what they want to do? How do you enable micro capabilities which can be combined to enable multiple solutions by different players? So that was the approach which was taken. And if I just go deeper, just to make it more real, one of the solutions which is rolled out as part of this, which is referred as energized textbooks, is nothing but a QR code printed in a book which literally exists in every child's hand, because all the government schools, government provide textbooks for free. So you can at least be ensured that they have a textbook in hand, if not any other thing. So you print a QR code into that, a book which is there in the hand of every child, and then you enable the discovery from a physical book to a digital world, which is infinite, through the scan of that QR code, through a mobile phone, through a behavior of scanning a QR code which exists in this country. With UPI accelerating the pace at which it does, it became a common behavior. So again, going back to what exists at a component level, as a capability level in the society, and how do you leverage those to build different capabilities, to build an infrastructure to enable multiple solutions. It's just a demonstration of that, which basically enabled the solution to reach Bharat and India at large. The basic fundamental principle is the principle of micro capabilities which can be combined to enable multiple solutions, the same way as the infrastructure does today. So if I come and zoom out and say Diksha is nothing but a DPI. It's a digital public infrastructure, behaves like any other infrastructure we experience day to day, right? Which is inspiring today many countries, which are looking at this and looking how do they replicate the similar thing in their context, in their country, education or otherwise. How does that happen? How does that get manifested? Because Diksha as is may not work in their context. The context, even if it is in education, will be different. And that's where this approach of digital public infrastructure, which we took, really helped to solve that problem. Because the underlying software, which is nothing but Sunbird, which is open source and a software which basically provide a set of building blocks, as we refer them, and specifications, which are used to be combined and configured to enable Diksha. And since it is built in a building block way, which is nothing but a 10 gram, I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, have played with 10 gram or similar, where you can combine and recombine the small components together into whatever shape and form, whatever solution you want to do. And again, it's a very similar concept. If you look at, again, connect to your physical space, right? You can combine them to many solutions. You can combine bricks to make whatever house you want to make. Or if you look at a road network, or you look at a car, multiple components built by different organizations are combined by many car manufacturers to build different type of cars and different type of vehicles. Same components. The context gets set when they're combined in a particular need. Same approach. So these components, these micro capabilities, which are built in a context independent way, generalized capabilities, and the ability to combine them in different contexts, resulted in the ability for different stakeholders coming, India and international, to use the same set of software, the same set of capabilities which were enabled through the journey of Diksha so far, to enable their educational infrastructure and solutions, to enable infrastructure and solution in non-education space, including agriculture, including health. CoWIN, I'm sure each of us are aware, right, what CoWIN is. There is a set of components which were also leveraged in that context. And this was done by the ecosystem. No one organization can enable all of this. So, and that's, the ecosystem comes, brings these, takes these capabilities which are there in Sunbird, which, I would refer as DPG. These are digital public goods which are available for anyone to take and solve their problems, enable their DPIs, their infrastructures in their context, without need to rebuild everything from scratch. And that's, to me, is DPG and DPI. Given the complexity of India, we are able to build these DPGs in Indian diverse and scale concept. Because scale is an important aspect of this. I would say we are designing things which can be leveraged by the world. So I'll stop there, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Alok. So obviously I can see some questions brewing, but Jojo, I think you're one of the oldest orgs out there, eGov Foundation. So do you want to share your perspective, and if you want to use the slides?
All right, thanks, Srikant. Okay, so I'm going to take a few minutes and basically tell you about, through the journey of eGov, to tell you about the why, the what, the how of what we work, and hopefully through that, tell you about how we look at DPGs, how we look at DPIs. So, is that fine? Is that still audible? Yeah. Okay. So we build digital public infrastructures. We work with governments. We work with markets. Yeah, that's better. We work with markets, civil society to drive digital scale, population scale digital transformations. Right now we work in 6 SDGs, and this is through our 4 missions, and which is largely in the areas of health, sanitation, local governance, and public finance management. What we look at is 3 pillars of our work. One is the digital public infrastructure itself. We look at creating and catalyzing market ecosystems, and we look at strengthening and building the capacity of governments. The impact of our work, and that's when I say our work, it's eGov through all our 100+ partners, can be seen in 6 countries, can be seen in 16 subnational governments. It's visible as part of 3 national missions. It's served over about 250 million citizens in India. There are 2 billion plus COVID certificates that were issued using one of the platforms that eGov builds. But before I go in there, I just wanted to kind of talk about, we will be talking a lot about digital technology and technology in general, right? But what we believe is that it's really about people. It's really about ecosystems coming together, communities coming together. And if you can enable them, they will do good stuff. And that brings me to why we exist. And as our mission statement, this is what we are after right now, where we're looking at catalyzing the achievement of SDGs by co-creating digital public infrastructure in 30 countries by 2030. And the key word over there is co-creating, right? We want to do it with others. We believe that there's, when we say solve, what we're looking at is distributing the ability to solve and not look at solving everything ourselves. So what is Digit? Briefly, I'd mentioned on the opening slide. So Digit is our digital public infrastructure. It also stands for Digital Infrastructure for Governance and Inclusive Transformation. It's an open source digital infrastructure. It's a set of platforms with foundational capabilities. That's exactly what Alok was mentioning a while ago, looking at microservices, micro capabilities, which is needed by governments, it's needed by markets and civil society to work together to deliver public service outcomes that help in the achievement of SDGs. a little bit of a double click on this. So if you see, and again, I'm going to use similar language to what Alok just mentioned, right? So there's, on the scale, let me just introduce a slide. You have a context-free capability here. You have the context incentive there. When we say context-free, we're talking about capabilities that can be used irrespective of what the context is. And this is in the form of your coded data infrastructure, which has registries, it has specs, it has standards, it has some reference data. You also have core services to make it real. Most of our apps, most of our services would have things like notifications, would have billing, would have some sort of reports, would have auditing, would have perhaps a location service. And these are core services that are used in multiple different applications. They come together in domain-specific platforms, right? So we could have a platform for health. We could have a platform for sanitation. We could have a platform for urban governance. And on top of them, you can build context-intensive services and apps, right? So these could be applications, these could be dashboards, these could be looking at any kind of data, but that is really, really context incentive. And now you're reusing a lot of these core capabilities. Let me now just spend a minute on the how of eGov. How do we do it? Our operating model focuses on building open digital infrastructure, strengthening the capacity of the state, and market participation. At the bottom, you see a digital platform. This is our core building blocks. You have digital public infrastructure. You have end solutions, open APIs, protocols, etc. And here, eGov as an organization participates a lot. We do get a lot of participation from our partners who contributed back to the platform. The second layer in blue is the co-creation ecosystem almost, right, where we're looking at building the state and market capacity. We do this through a lot of training, a lot of workshops, a lot of implementation guides, a lot of advisory. And on top of that then enables impact programs. And these are our missions. These are programs that governments run. There we basically play a role of an advisor, right? And a convener, where we're bringing in the market together, we're bringing in the governments together to go and deliver impact using these platforms and programs. This is just a visual of how it actually pans out on the ground, right? So when we say enablement, when we say training, when we say hand-holding others, this is the kind of work that teams also do. So it is technology, but it is also working very closely with communities. It's working very closely with our partner SI ecosystem, our technology partners. It's working very closely with governments. So here, for example, we've got, there's a workshop that's happening on sanitation. There's something happening over here on the training NIUA and the team back in our office. And that's the kind of work that eGov also does, which is working with the larger ecosystem. Over a period of time, we've built an open network of 100+ partners. And this is what is building capacity at a state and a market level to solve problems at scale, right? These are broadly classified over here, as you see it, as Samaj Sarkar Bazaar, which is organizations that are representative of the civil society, and citizens. You have Sarkar, which is governments, and you have Bazaar, which is the market players who all come together to go and deliver this impact at scale. As part of the work that eGov does, our inputs also go in terms of creating these enabling assets to do these trainings. So you would find over 1,000 knowledge assets created, about 17,000+ hours of training, and enabling about 50 partners. And this then leads to, it gives an approach like this. What we learned is gives you very high leverage, right? So if you're looking at leverage on capital to impact, in our case, it comes to about a 26x return on capital. Here's just a visual of what's happened since Digit first went live in 2017. So starting with one instance, right now we have 28 instances of Digit. Starting in 2017 to now, we've got about 1,500 urban local bodies, that's your cities, municipalities, live on Digit, and you have about 5,000 villages that are using the products built on Digit. It's got about 230 million Indian citizens, or 250 Indian million citizens being served on products and programs built on Digit again. And this is largely done through partners, as you can see on the map. So this is just a view of how those products would show up on the platform, just to make it a little real, right? So you have an easy interface on mobile, on the web, and this is again, it's built on a design system that, that's available for the ecosystem to use without any restrictions, without any fee, and they can build on that. There's a guided flow for most citizens. There's simple payments and taxes and fees. There are notifications, things that you would expect in any app is being used by governments as well now. For employees, there's a personalized dashboard for all applications, and this is to make their work a little smoother, right? Where you're giving them the tools so that they are more productive in their day-to-day work. You're seeing two aspects of it. One is a complete web-based. This is what an employee would look at, so they get a sense of what's coming in on their, on the roles, on the tasks assigned to them, what is nearing an SLA, what is not nearing an SLA, and that can be configured to their requirements. And there you've also got a simple web interface to assist citizens over the counter. It can also be leveraged, and this is done by one of the partners. You can use the same data on the platform and build your own solutions on top of that. And this is done in the state of Andhra Pradesh by one of the partners from the state, where they can build a visual dashboard to actually go and track at a micro level on the problems that citizens are facing. So I'll stop with that. So I'll stop with that, and I'll pass it back to you, Srikant.
Thanks, Jojo. Raghu, let's hear your perspectives before we jump into a few points that I wanted to cover today.
And I'll try to. So can you just pull up the slides? While they pull up the slides, hi everyone. I'm president at the AI and Robotics Technology Park at IISc. I also spend a lot of time as a fellow on the Lancet Commission for Reimagining India's Health System. And what I thought I would do today is actually use a vertical and show if these DPGs were to work, what does the future look like, right? Because sometimes we technologists can get lost on all the cool stuff we could build, but what does it actually mean, right? Quickly about Artpark, what we do is we build for-profit and non-profit ventures at the intersection of multiple ecosystems. For-profit ventures, well understood. Non-profit ventures, you actually just saw examples of that, the sort of stuff these folks are building. Because when you think of public goods, shared assets, it's very difficult to do that in a for-profit way. That's why we help build non-profits too, right? I'll skip through this. Again, most of the presentation is going to be about healthcare, but there's lots of paradigm shifts that have to happen in health. And this is something we articulated as part of this Lancet Commission, right? Now let's time travel into 2030, right? Let's say somewhere in rural India, Shanti wakes up with a cough. She grabs her phone, launches Sahayak. She says, and Sahayak asks her how she's feeling. She says, maybe in some other language, how are you feeling in Kannada, Chennagidira. She says, mujhe khasi hai. Sahayak, after taking permission, listens to the cough, asks few more questions, and let's say an AI screening engine that not only listens to the cough, uses the symptoms, but also uses a surveillance platform data to say, well, urgency score is low, thankfully, but guess what? This is 2030, so you're dealing with COVID-29, and unfortunately, maybe still TB, right? And those are in red, so we need to get you a doctor consultation. How is that going to happen? We all know that thanks to PMJ, secondary and tertiary care are being covered, but 2030, hopefully, we'll cover these sort of primary care situations especially, right? And you might know that, again, as a digital public good, something called unified health interface is coming into the picture, right? Explain it simply, you use Gmail or Microsoft, but you send each other email, right? You're not stuck with, hey, the other person should also use Microsoft Outlook, right? Similarly, anyone should be able to access any doctor or any health service using this. That's the fundamental. And this is a digital public good, right? And she gets an appointment, physical, digital appointments are all synced. Again, there is DPGs behind being able to do that sort of stuff. Asha and A&M get, notified. Asha shows up, says, don't worry, uses her phone to do some things, and uses DigiLocker, right, to unlock her health records for the consultation. Now, the point of all this is, this is not simply about, building complicated technology stuff. This is the analogy I like to use is, sure, it's not about giving someone a fish or donating a meal. It's showing them how to fish, as you say. But even if for folks to fish, guess what? There needs to be some common ground rules on how we are not going to overfish in that lake, right? There are going to be some rules about, someone has to invent the fishing pole, right? And we all need to do this in a way that, we don't end up in this tragedy of commons, right? So there's lots, that's what public goods do, right? Couple of things we are specifically working on. Health data, you saw much of it all as part of this story, right? If you're going to say if you're going to screen for any specific potential conditions, we need data sets. And for bringing data sets together, we are building a hubs and spokes technology-enabled system with ICMR and ISC and every major health institution in the country. And both Alok and Jojo talked about micro, what's the word? Micro tasks? No, microservices model, right? So this doesn't actually represent a flow of, tasks, but broadly the sort of microservices that actually will have to come together for this, right? Similarly, in language, you saw Sahayak understood whether she spoke in Kannada or in, maybe Bhojpuri, right? We are actually also building large open source data sets because language is a continuum. It's not just 22 languages, right? And who the hell are you, simply because you grew up in Hindi, to say that Hindi is somehow the prototypical Hindi that Alexa will understand, right? So, do you understand my grandmother's Hindi that's spoken in Muzaffarpur, right? So to do that, you need data sets that represent the diversity. So come work with us. We are looking for partners and team, and of course, money.
So broadly, just trying to summarize what you said. So digital public, there is an infrastructure, and then digital public goods are sort of like the interfaces or modules that you can sort of touch and feel. And we see that the impact goes across sectors from healthcare to commerce. These are public, which means people can access and build new applications on top of it. So this is great, but then here's the first question of the day, right? And why are we here? Like, why didn't we have this discussion, say, 10 years back? Is this something that's like a new cool concept that comes up and goes off, or is there a fundamental shift? Is there a force that is actually pushing all of this? So Raghu, you're on the ground, so tell me, why DPGs now?
Yeah, I think there's... you can take it. First of all, I think there's some good work that, folks such as EkStep and eGov have done to first raise an awareness level, right? That it's not just about the water that flows out, but it's the piping that's there, right? So that's now better understood in a digital context. There is that. Second is, overall as an ecosystem, more and more is getting digitized, right? So it's kind of urgent now that we really talk about it, else we cannot build effective ecosystems. Third, of course, this is much slower. I think on the philanthropic side, very slowly. Still, I would say only maybe 1 out of 100 philanthropists get it. But at least because these are some big philanthropists, they are able to drive this. And they have found willing partners within government and industry to actually drive this forward.
Yeah, but here on the philanthropy part, right? The fact that it's still only philanthropists is the problem, right? So, Alok, how do you see that? I mean, is it always going to be driven by philanthropic money? The concept of DPI, DPG itself. What are the forces coming in play? But to his point, it cannot be a small set of people just doing it. So, what do you see on the ground?
Yes, see, from my perspective, there are a couple of things which has happened. So there's a reason why now and not 10 years back. If you look at society at large, right, the fundamental need to enable access and choice to the society at large is a fundamental mindset, which I think every government, everyone works, because that's how the economic model, kicks in. And that was largely done through physical infrastructure. But if you look at last decade, the rapid, adoption of digital in various economic and non-economic activities, where the whole economy, depending largely on physical infrastructure, the majority of your society largely on physical order is not true anymore. And hence the need for giving same choice and same access, both from a consumer or a customer perspective, but also from the perspective of who provides the service, have to be solved in digital. So I think there has been a journey which has been taken across the world, not just in India, right? And I think that's what brings us here. That is one point. The second is, I don't think it's just a space for NGO. This is already a space where all three players come together and play, and that is, that is very clear in physical infrastructure, and to me that is also very clear even in the DPI and DPG space, and DPG also in one way, where the business models which follow something available as an open source in public being leveraged to create commercial model. I think we have very many successful examples. You look at Red Hat, you look at many other. So I think that is already proven. So I don't see this as a pure a few individuals or a particular NGO space. It is a space for all three to play, commercial and non-commercial. DPI is a way to enable access and choice in many business models.
Thanks, Alok. Jojo, what do you see on the ground?
Just wanted to add to that, to completely agree with what Raghu and Alok has said. And I think somewhere it's also about the journey that it takes, right? To get people to work together, you need trust. And if you can demonstrate that trust, people will come together and work. And hence, you see the Samaj Sarkar Bazaar, you see them collaborating across multiple programs now. And hence, if you see most of the journeys on any of these DPIs, it starts slowly at first, and suddenly you see an exponential growth. And that's the power of when people come together and try and solve this. And that's basically about looking at trust in the ecosystems itself. And in the way that DPGs and DPIs are designed, they enable that trust, right, at the foundational level.
So you're saying the philanthropy part of it is more like a kickstarting of it, but very quickly you see commercial organizations on a large scale. I mean, there are a few commercial organizations.
I'm saying it's already done. So if I give an example, UPI, Aadhaar, okay, these two are the prime examples where the ecosystem of commercial, non-commercial is already playing. To me, it's already proven. I don't think we are figuring it out. To me, the DPI story has already started a while back.
Interesting. Raghu, yeah, something.
It's done in one space where the type of transaction or the type of interactions are relatively simple, I would say, right? If you go into the health space, sit a few days deep in health services and health ministry, or deep in the agriculture, I don't think it's a done deal. I think what UPI has done is it's opened our eyes of what's possible. I do think we still need to figure this out for far more complex interactions and ecosystems, right? That's why we are embarking on, for example, in health, right? There are lots of sensitivity around health data, right? Everyone, whether that data is good or bad, right? It's like water everywhere in a salty ocean, not a drop to drink, right? So I think we have a great start. Philanthropy will continue to play a big role in de-risking very early stages of development of these ecosystems and these assets. And I think more and more as we can bring industry together. I mean, that's why NASSCOM is a great place to be talking about this, right? If industry comes together faster, we can actually accelerate these things, right? The natural inclination of any business is to try and hold as much of the pie together. Growing the pie requires industry associations and ecosystem plays. And that's where I think philanthropy partly comes in.
So moving on to a related question, right? And obviously, even when I took the starting poll, I think less than 2% of the audience even knew what DPG is, right? So obviously, we're at very early stages, and clearly this seems to be a multi-stakeholder effort. And there are a few pioneers, whether they're philanthropists or even commercial organizations trying to do that. But can you, Raghu, can you walk us through at a high level, what are the impediments, right? We talked about the forces that are coming into play. What are the impediments and how do you classify them?
Yeah, see, one, actually we already talked about some of this, right? Awareness itself is a first, awareness and taking this approach. For example, if you talk to doctors, right, innovators, they say, health data is a challenge. Awareness that how the data comes together itself is what needs to be solved. And for that, you need, bunch of building blocks. And for that, you need bunch of specifications and standards. That awareness is number one. Second, of course, is actually getting enough, these sort of shifts are not easy. It requires political capital of various sides and a lot of sweat and grime and people, taking this transformation journey, right? And often one of the big challenges here is multiple institutions playing in one space, right? You need to bring multiple institutions together and stakeholders together and make that happen. And third, of course, usually everyone looks for some quick wins, right? And that involves kind of mapping your long term with the short term, and quick wins usually require, igniting investments and interest, right? Those are some of the things that come to my mind. The last one is actually talent. A lot more talent needs to be taking this approach, should be working with folks like us, and that's something that I'll just throw it out there.
I think that links back to the awareness part of it, right? But Alok, what do you see as the...
No, I agree with Raghu. See, in our context, we say there are few important winning implementations already there. UPI, Aadhaar, Diksha, and CoWIN, and few more. But the DPI, DPG has not become a day-to-day usual conversation, right? We're still not there, right? And it's not just about few. Each of the members sitting in this panel, each of the member in the industry which looks at digitization as a avenue, when that becomes a mainstream conversation, right? That's a path still to be taken. I think awareness is great. Today, at a international level, the conversation on DPI and DPG is happening very, very seriously in various forums. India being seen as someone who's showing the light, the realization of the impact of DPI, and few of the examples I shared, has been seriously looked by multiple countries today. And just to give you that point, right? Identity at a national level was seen in a very different context when India started the Aadhaar journey, and fortunately I was part of that, so I can tell you from my first-hand experience. But today, Aadhaar as a platform to solve not just security, but really benefits, and many other commercial, financial economic transactions. The world is seeing it from a different lens. The world is seeking out for how does India can help me to solve my problem in my identity platform, which has also germinated into another, initiative, MOSIP. So there are actually many more DPGs which are already work in progress. We don't have time to go through into it. So I think the platform is set. But as Raghu said, and I fully agree, I think there is still work to be done to make it mainstream. When you don't have to have the panel to discuss what is DPG and DPI, right? When we reach there, then it has institutionalized. It has become a regular conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, Alok. Jojo, so obviously eGovernment Foundation, you work a lot more with governments, and you can't say public without bringing government into the picture, right? So what has been your experience on the mindset change within government? Obviously, at a central level, we saw that India talked about it at an international level, right? But does that you work with a lot of state governments, you work with multiple other government agencies. Do you still see any impediments yet to be crossed? If so, what are they broadly?
So impediments, yes, more like challenges, and I can perhaps spend a minute just talking about how we view it, right? And this is a challenge across anything that you work. Right? So one is the nature of the problems is fairly complex, right? And at eGov itself, we may not have a complete understanding of the problem, right? So we follow what we refer to internally as a 5-threaded approach, right? So I just want you all to imagine these individual threads, and I'll kind of call them out and how they come together, right? And first is really just getting a shared understanding and a shared narrative of what's the problem and how are we going to approach it, right? And that's what we do with a lot of our ecosystem partners. And these are governments, these are people from the civic society, these are technology partners, where we come together to get a common understanding of, hey, this is the problem, this is how we are viewing it, and this is how it can be approached. The next thread really is about designing and building the digital public good, and designing it with the right principles. And Alok had touched upon them, a few of them, where your do no harm, privacy, looking at minimalism, looking at interoperability, looking at designing things in an unbundled way. It's there in the core or foundation of how these digital public goods and platforms are designed. Then we look at the third thread, which is really saying, hey, okay, we understood the problem, we've got a view on it, we've got a shared narrative, we've designed and developed the digital public goods. Let's exemplify it, because you need to be able to go and create trust. You need to be able to go and demonstrate it somewhere at scale and quickly, right? Saying that this actually works. And the fourth thread then is saying, how do you build a scale ecosystem around this? And the scale ecosystem is, again, it's our partners. And finally, we look at whatever has been created, has been exemplified, and you have an ecosystem around it, it's got to sustain itself. And that sustaining of what you've created happens partly through institutionalization, which is, say, what has happened in the case of Digit, which is our Digit urban platform, which has now been institutionalized, say, by NIUA at the Ministry of Urban and Housing Affairs, where they're going to take Digit, which is now is renamed as Upyog, to 2,500 cities in their digital transformation journey. So that's how we see, what the challenges are and how it can be approached. Now, if you look at each of these threads, it also talks about what the challenges are, right? So the challenges are in understanding the problem itself, and that's the biggest challenge, really. Like, do we have a common shared understanding of the problem, right? Then you've got about how do you go and design it. That's your second challenge. The third challenge is, where do we go and exemplify this? I need to be able to go and build trust in the ecosystem that something like this can work at scale and can be built and delivered at speed. And your fourth challenge is there an ecosystem of partners, of players around it who will come together and work? And the last challenge is, once all this is done, how are you going to sustain it, right? So that's how we look at the challenge and our approach towards it.
Interesting. So we're kind of out of time on some of the questions I wanted to ask, so I'll sacrifice my questions. So let's open it up to the audience. So you have 3 DPG builders over here. So questions, anyone has questions, please raise your hands. We can go.
Hi, my question is to Jojo. This is very specific to, in terms of Digit platform, right? So is this Digit platform focused to solving problems that our government, entities are looking at, or this is also to look at solving end user problems? Say, for example, there was a slide in which you showed that garbage collection or street lights and other things are happening. So are you focused on working with only governments, state governments and other entities? Or are you also looking at expanding this? Because as Alok mentioned, UPI became UPI when more and more people started using it. So is there a way by which, say, OEMs can partner with you so that these services can be taken to the end users?
So there's a short answer and there's a long answer. The short answer is yes, it's open for everyone, right? The long answer is that the reality is most of your public service delivery happens via governments. So the governments end up becoming the biggest users of this. However, that's not to say that it's not being used by people outside the government. For example, the example that you're using, right? Let's say if we're talking about sanitation, we have a program that is running in Odisha that uses Digit sanitation platform. A part of it is used by the government, but part of it is also used by private players. Your desludging operators, right, actually use a part of the service as well, and that's independent, but it's running on the same platform. A part of the service is also being used by your fecal treatment plant operators, which is run by self-help groups. And on top of that, now we're collaborating with another organization that is really looking at delivering benefits to sanitation workers. Now, they're building, and they've actually built an application on their own, which is not on Digit, but they're leveraging the data that is there on Digit and working on that, right? So that's one example. On the other example that you mentioned about can organizations participate? Of course they do, right? So we have a really good example of an organization called Reap Benefit, and what they do is they work with volunteers in cities to come and solve civic problems. Right? And they had built an app on their own. It was a chatbot on WhatsApp, etc., and it was running independently. And the problem that, in fact, that was in one of the examples, but I didn't share that. One of the problems that they faced was that they're able to get people together. They're able to get people to report the problems, but then taking those issues and highlighting it to the municipal government becomes a challenge, right? Because then you're opening up another channel of delivering this. Now, it just so happened that they, we got together and realized that, hey, a lot of the governments actually use Digit for public grievance redressal. And there it was a simple interoperability that had to be done. You have another partner, a social enterprise that's working on these things, built their own app, got their own volunteers. All that needed to be done was channelize the grievances on the same platform that governments use. Governments resolve it as they would resolve any other problem, give the feedback, and it's channelized back into another application run by another social enterprise. So yes, that's happening, but we'd love a lot more to happen.
Thank you.
Any other question? It's hard to see from here. Yeah.
Else the panel will ask the audience questions.
Yeah. Do you have questions for the audience, Raghu?
Now we are going to give a DPG quiz. No, I want a quick question.
Raghu with the mic.
How many of you would like to be involved in DPGs? Okay. There's a video recording. We are going to get in touch with you.
But
just
quickly,
on a lighter note, see, there's lots of glamour in building one particular AI solution, right? Where you say, you take an image, do screening for that, etc. Right? But one of the things we learned, I was one of the co-founders of Vadvani Institute for AI, right? One of the first things I learned is actually the failure points before the AI even integrates with the system and delivers it is what we call generally the digital pipelines. And the processes, workflows in a way, digital pipelines are actually integrated. You don't see this problem with an Amazon where you build a recommender engine, but you don't worry about whether that particular book that's recommended is in stock or not. Because someone has this whole thing built, right? Lots of in the public space, government space, underserved populations, I think civic organizations, technology organizations, and governments have to come together to take this effort of building this layer, right? So general call out, come work with all of us.
yeah. And as a closing note, so while we talked about DPGs and DPIs, it's not always just software. It could be a specification, a way of doing things, know-how, even culture if you can codify it. So you don't have to be a technologist per se to adopt as well as imagine on DPIs. So we are out of time, but Alok, Raghu and Jojo are here. So those of you who raise hands and those of you who forgot to raise hands, please do reach out to them post the session. Thank you so much, Jojo, Alok and Raghu.